name's Helen McDowell and I'm Head of Government Affairs. I'm Head of Government Affairs and Global Public Health at ViV Healthcare. And I'm here today with my co-chair, Anton Pozniak, and I'm the industry co-chair of the Industry Liaison Forum for the IAS. So it's my absolute pleasure to open our first roundtable of 2022 today, which is focusing on end-to-end diagnostics, implementation, advocating for innovative solutions. This is the first roundtable in the series, and we're really looking forward to an engaging and interactive session today. And obviously the content of this is really going to be informed by many of you who bring a lot of experience and expertise to this discussion. So before we get into the meat, I'd like to pass the mic to my co-chair of the ILF, Anton Pozniak, for a brief introduction. Over to you, Anton.
Thanks very much, Helen, and good afternoon to you all. My name is Anton Pozniak. I'm the immediate post-president of the IAS, and I'm a non-industry representative of the Industry Liaison Forum. Now, it's a great pleasure to be here today to explore and discuss together these opportunities and challenges in diagnostic implementation, the WHO collaborative procedure, its process and adoption. So I'd like to welcome all the participants and our guest presenters who will be introduced shortly. But first, here are a couple of housekeeping rules. We can't have a meeting without those for the roundtable. So the roundtable will be recorded up until and excluding the breakout room exercise. The recording will be made available to the participants and on the IAS website as part of the educational materials in the coming week. By staying in this meeting, you consent to being recorded for this portion of the roundtable. So we encourage you, though, to send questions to our presenters at any time through the chat function at the bottom of your screen. I don't think I'm talking to anyone who doesn't know about the chat function in Zoom. We're all very used to it now after 2 years of working this way. And now, please remember to focus your questions on today's roundtable theme. But if you have other questions, you can send them to the ILF at iassociety.org, and we'll do our best to answer them. Now, in case you have any issues with Zoom, we all have those from time to time. Please also send us any technical questions via the chat box. So you can just put in the chat, my internet's a problem, I can't get this, I can't do that. And that's all great. We'll try and help you with that overall. And it's with great pleasure, I'm handing over to Nathalie Barrière, who's been one of the moving forces of getting this organized. And I must thank Nelly, Roger and the team for doing this. It's a marvelous achievement to get this roundtable up and running and organized. And I know it's going to go extremely smoothly because it's in her hands. She's a project manager of the Corporate Partnership Program at the IAS, and she's going to kick us off. Over to you, Nelly.
Thank you so much for this wonderful introduction, Anton. I'd like to welcome all the participants joining this meeting, and just to provide you with a couple of quick overview announcements around this roundtable structure and discussion. It's a great pleasure and honor to have the following guest presenters with us today. Helen McDowell and Anton Pozniak, you have just met, who are wonderful co-chairs of the Industry Liaison Forum. And the presenters are Tammy Stewart from Roche Diagnostics USA, Kate Chi from SG Diagnostics Singapore, Avaruz Maritz from Medical Diagnostics South Africa, Michael Messenger from Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency of the United Kingdom, Anafi Mataka from ASLM Zimbabwe, Susie Braniff from Pre-Qualification IVD Assessment Team within the Division of Access to Medicine and Health Products at WHO Switzerland, and Agnes Sitekio of Facilitated Products Introduction Team, which is part of the Regulatory and Safety Unit under the Regulation and Pre-Qualification Department of WHO. Their presentations will be followed by a Q&A section and a breakout room exercise, where we will be able to discuss challenges and opportunities in relation to the WHO collaborative procedure, process, and its adoption. Questions can be posed via chat, as Anton has mentioned, and they will be addressed during the Q&A portion of this roundtable. Please know that all the detailed biographies can be found through the bit.ly link that my colleague will post shortly in the chat. I'd also like to emphasize that Industry Liaison Forum aims to provide stakeholders involved in the HIV response with a neutral platform to foster dialogue and action along the HIV prevention and diagnosis and care continuum. We might not find answers to all challenges faced by diagnostic developers today, but it's an important step forward improving access to diagnostics. With that, I would like to hand over to our first speaker, Tammy Stewart-Walt, who will open the session with her presentation of COVID-19 story, challenges and opportunities for IVD developers, the Roche perspective. Tammy Stewart-Walt is a global head of regulatory policy for foundational principles and supranational organizations. In her role, she collaborates with the global regulatory community to identify modern and flexible solutions that strengthen regulatory frameworks and speed access to quality products. And now, without further ado, one second, over to Tammy.
So much for that introduction. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this amazing event. Before I get started, I would like to thank the WHO and regulators around the world for their unprecedented commitment and unwavering dedication to help us through the COVID pandemic. While we are not out of the woods yet, because of their tireless efforts, patients gained access to valuable diagnostics which helped contain the spread of the virus. With every new challenge, reflection allows us to be better prepared. Therefore, I would like to share with you COVID lessons learned from an industry perspective and make recommendations. The image of a clock could not be more perfect because each lesson learned was amplified by our race against time. A wife, husband, mother, father, child, grandparent, or friend was waiting at that finish line. What manufacturers typically took years to develop had to be compressed into just a few months. And as products quickly evolved, kit sizes increased, and manufacturing was ramped up, we had to secure additional approvals, all while aiming at a moving target, as divergent emergency pathways sprouted up from multiple jurisdictions. We had to overcome not only regulatory differences, but also multiple formats, country-specific clinical trial requirements, and in-country testing. Staff worked tirelessly to perform this work, and I want to thank industry as a whole, because collectively, we delivered faster than ever thought possible. Now, taking these challenges to heart and envisioning how we can do things better, we would like to make the following general recommendations. 1, we recommend making COVID lessons learned a normal practice. 2, we recommend full reliance on the trusted work of reference authorities, notified bodies, and recognized institutions across the total product life cycle. 3, we recommend convergence of regulatory requirements, as this will ensure a high level of quality while radically simplifying regulatory processes. And we must work to make those processes electronic, and this includes work packages, signatures, labeling, and even remote inspections. 4, we recommend ensuring interagency alignment, particularly regarding positive testing reporting requirements, as this will help ensure the right mix of lab, point of care, and at-home testing. Now I'd like to shift and share COVID lessons learned specific to lower to middle income countries. But first, I want to commend the WHO for establishing the forward-leaning good reliance practice guidance, as well as an abridged pre-qual program, and now the collaborative review procedure. Your work is helping to pioneer a path to an innovative, more effective way to conserve valuable resources and ensure expedited access. Now, to frame these conversations, it is important to realize that some countries rely on aid funding to purchase diagnostic products, and in some cases, that funding is contingent on purchasing WHO pre-qual product. Therefore, we recommend allowing aid programs to use aid funding to purchase products that either purchase WO pre-qual product or product approved by a reference agency, whichever comes first. This will allow countries to secure products as soon as a trusted source approves them. We urge the WHO to practice recognition on approvals, product changes, and inspections from reference authorities, notified bodies, or recognized institutions, as this will further streamline their progressive programs. In the event additional testing is deemed necessary, We also recommend allowing developers to select a non-WHO approved laboratory so long as that lab is accredited. This is consistent with global best practice and can further speed access. And last, we recommend the WHO expand the scope of the abridged program beyond high-risk products, because medium-risk products are also highly scrutinized by reference agencies. And expanding the scope would allow tests like COVID to qualify for the program. In closing, there are two fundamental recommendations I want to leave with you. Perhaps the single most effective way to rapidly improve access and reduce complexity while maintaining quality is to have a national policy on regulatory reliance and to put someone in charge of implementing it. And secondly, achieve strong reliance between the WHO and the reference authority requirements, such as the IMDRF, including standards. I am confident that if we achieve these two things, we can solidify a new future for medical device and IVD regulation, one that continues to put the patient at the center of our decisions and to ensure timely access to the highest quality products in every corner of the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Tammy. A really clear presentation and some clear recommendations as to and learnings based on the COVID experience. So thank you for that. We're going to move on to our second speaker of today, which is Kate Chi, who is the founder and CEO of SG Diagnostics in Singapore. She founded SG Diagnostics in 2020 and it's strategically stationed in the hub of Southeast Asia, aiming to address the accessibility of IVD products around the globe. She has over 10 years experience in research and development of diagnostics devices. So looking forward, Kate, to hear your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Kate, and I don't know what's happening to my presentation. It's jumping. So I'm Kate here. So my presentation today, I'm going to talk about, in general, the IVD regulatory challenges for manufacturers in Southeast Asia, especially manufacturers like ourselves, that is young and new to the industry, and who was more focused on R&D previously, and now switched to manufacturer. So we have met quite a numbers of regulatory challenges, especially for the challenges in Southeast Asia, which is what I would like to share with all of you here. And I would like to see, your some common understanding on the way moving forward. So first, a general introduction. So I'm Kate, and I'm a scientist by training, biomedical scientist by training, and I started SG Diagnostics in Singapore in 2020 with the aim of building a diagnostic hub and biomedical hub in Singapore to serve initially Southeast Asia and later to the globe. So why in Singapore is, Singapore is the hub here, is the most developed country in this region, and Singapore has the most complete regulatory policies in the entire Southeast Asia. So until now, SG Diagnostics is certified with the ISO and we're certified with the IVD, and our scope is to produce a secondary assembly, storage, distribution of IVD test kit, especially in this special time, the SG Diagnostics COVID-19 antigen rapid test. So till now, through all the struggles for the past 2 years, we have obtained approval across the world, more than 10 countries. So today's presentation, I would like to share more of our struggles in Southeast Asia, which we thought, with a better guidance, with a better support, especially from WHO, I think for companies like us, we could have done better to support the local communities here. A little bit background, which I'm not sure whether you're familiar in terms of the Southeast Asian countries. Each country have their distinct regulatory bodies. In Singapore, we have Health Science Authority, HSA, which is under MOH. So I would say HSA is considered the most reputable and most reliable agencies in the entire Southeast Asia. So a lot of regulatory bodies do take HSA as a reference. But again, in Malaysia, we have Medical Device Authority. In Indonesia, we have MOH. Philippines, we have FDA. Philippine FDA. Thailand, we have Thailand FDA. So the reason why I will list all this here is even for a Singapore company, we still need to go through these individual regulatory bodies one by one, and all of them have distinct requirements, even for just the COVID-19 antigen test, which is for us, we found, it's a pity because the whole community here, we're close to each other, and we should share kind of a common guideline, some kind of common guidance in order for companies to support each country and in a better and faster manner. So in general, our feedback led to regulatory updates for COVID product is first, for example, for Malaysia, which is just across the border of Singapore, even though you are Singapore approved product, you still need to go for mandatory MDA testing in the MDA accredited clinical lab for the clinical studies. So I think in general, if there is a cross-line approved list of approved list of clinical study body that can help to assist a regulatory approval, it can facilitate the regulatory process of the individual companies in the entire Southeast Asian countries. Second is, of course, we have prolonged process, and we have to go through each and individual process in all the countries in Southeast Asia. Again, there's no cross-reference. There's no standard guideline of all the countries here, and we do have quite a number of countries. So, for us, we definitely look forward for some kind of initiative like what we have in the EU region for CE or etc. So I think that's the part that we would seek at WHO's guidance. So in general, in terms of our take-home recommendations, first, we would like to propose to have a simplified process for product registration across all Southeast Asian countries for companies within or without or outside of Southeast Asia. Second, we want to have a better source of resource in order to understand each country's requirements. Because until now, the countries in this territory do have very distinct requirements, and we do not have a common source of all this regulatory requirement, regulatory updates. So I think in general is we as a manufacturer, we are here to support. We are here to provide the product and provide the solutions to the territory, to the company, to the countries, and to the people. So whichever way can save us time, save us complications, to have a regulatory approval so that we can supply our products in the best way would be recommended, especially in this region. That's all for my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Again, some really clear presentations and learns of where we go and with a great focus on Southeast Asia. So our next presentation is pre-recorded, and it comes from Avarus Maritz. Avarus is here in the call and will be available to answer questions and be part of the broader discussion, but we'll play the pre-recorded presentation first. So Avarus is a quality assurance and regulatory affairs specialist at Medical Diagnostics in South Africa. His academic background is biomedical sciences and medicines development, and he began his career as a quality assurance manager at the Commodity Exchange in Namibia in 2008. Since then, he has worked to establish a pharmaceutical plant for Door Pharmaceuticals and has helped Cape Biofarms design and implement its quality management system and upscale from an R&D company to manufacturing site. So good experience across the board. Recently, he was employed by GIZ as the lead technical advisor for the ARV regional value chain promotion. So over to Avarus.
Hello, my name is Avarus Maritz, and I am the Quality Assurance and Regulatory Affairs Specialist at Medical Diagnostics. Today I will be discussing the challenges and opportunities for IVD developers especially during the COVID-19 setting. Next. Medical Diagnostics was established in 2010 as a developer and manufacturer of lateral flow rapid diagnostic test kits. We manufacture high-quality rapid tests using our trade secret methodology for increased sensitivity and early detection. Next. In 2020, the world experienced a global disaster that not only caused a great public health concern, but also exposed the bureaucracy surrounding access to healthcare, especially in Africa. Next. As with many companies, Medical Diagnostics experienced many challenges during the pandemic, which included development, regulatory approval, and marketing. Next. So firstly, getting COVID positive samples was extremely difficult. Because the virus was new, no institutions were willing to share samples, especially if you did not have ethical clearance. Thus, we had to first obtain ethical clearance and a good clinical practice certificate to engage with hospitals and patients. We also experienced delays in supply chain, which impacted our daily operations. In South Africa, generally, there is not enough local funding for company growth. Next. Our regulatory authority in South Africa is called SAHPRA. Initial communication with SAHPRA was extremely poor. However, it improved in late 2021. There was a lot of miscommunication between SAHPRA and the National Reference Lab. In this case, the National Health Sciences Lab was appointed by SAHPRA, but they were unaware that SAHPRA had appointed them. The cost of IVD validation at the National Reference Lab was very expensive, and the process was extremely slow. Currently in South Africa, no home testing for COVID is allowed. This, plus slow regulatory reaction, surely impacted viral spread. Next. Our COVID-19 antigen test was only approved by SAHPRA in December of 2021, which means that we just had under 2 months to market our product. Next. So what could have been done differently? Well, SAHPRA has only begun to enforce the need for manufacturers to apply for a validation license at the National Reference Lab in the last 2 years. SAHPRA requirements for IVD product marketing for the public tender market keeps changing. First, SAHPRA communicated that locally manufactured IVDs only need SAHPRA approval. The following week, they said that the IVDs needed to be WHO pre-qualified. This caused a lot of confusion for local manufacturers who wanted to take part in the public tender system. The goalposts, for local manufacturers keeps shifting, which makes it difficult to take part in the supply of IVDs in your local country. This also led to foreign products flooding the South African market due to non-existent import tariffs and duties. This led to zero market localization, which had a negative impact on local companies. Next. So from a manufacturing company operating in the South African private market, we can offer the following recommendations. National regulatory authorities should reevaluate approval of locally manufactured products versus imported products. WHO pre-qualification requirements on top of SAHPRA approval does not make sense, in that SAHPRA deems itself a stringent regulatory authority. Thus, the need for WHO pre-qualification for a locally manufacturing company does not make sense. It doubles the work and effort and costs. However, WHO pre-qualification for imported IVDs is obviously reasonable. There needs to be a great improvement also in public-private dialogues, especially when it concerns regulatory matters and national procurement regulations and guidelines. Next. Thank you everyone for sitting and listening to my presentation.
Thank you, Avarus, and I'm sure there'll be some good questions coming from that. Great to see a very specific local example from South Africa. So I'm going to now introduce Mike Messenger, who is our next speaker today, who is the head of diagnostics at the Medicines and Health Products Regulatory Agency, MHRA, in the UK, and a visiting professor at the School of Medicine at the University of Leeds. He's worked in the medical technology industry for 20 years and has a career spanning pharmaceuticals, advanced therapeutics, medical devices, IVDs, and artificial intelligence. So extremely well qualified to be with us today. His current role sees him leading scientific programs to ensure safe and effective diagnostics are available to UK patients, of which I am personally grateful as a UK citizen, but including COVID-19 tests. And he's also been developing the UK's future IVD regulations and MHRA IVD change program. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Helen? Excellent.
Yes.
So I thought I would just present a few of the what I consider to be the generalizable lessons from a UK response to COVID-19. So next slide, please. So as you can see from this slide here, the UK was somewhat late to the testing party, but once we got going, we really embraced testing wholeheartedly, and the numbers of tests that are being conducted in the UK have been quite eye-watering in general, and I think it's quite an impressive step change from where we were at the start of the pandemic. And I think one of the areas that has been probably most contentious, but also increasingly successful with varying degrees of success, and I think there's some nuance there, is around the introduction of lateral flow self-testing. So what you can see here is that in total we've run about 471 million PCR tests, and weekly we're running about 2.5 million tests on average. But from a lateral flow perspective, we've had over 230 million lateral flow results reported back. Weekly, we're testing about 8.5 million people at peak. It varies quite significantly depending on both supply and also various other factors that are going on with regards to case rates, etc. But we have detected about 2.5 million positive cases using asymptomatic lateral flow testing, primarily through self-testing or assisted testing modalities. And I should note here that not all self-tests are actually reported, so the numbers of self-tests being conducted are much higher than those reported here. These are just the results that get reported back to the Department of Health and Social Care. I mean, self-testing in itself is a topic for a separate conversation in terms of the challenges and the approaches. But I think the evidence that we're seeing at the moment is that it definitely has a place in future pandemic preparedness. So next slide, please. So I've picked on some of the key lessons that I thought would be of interest to this group, and you know, it's not a surprise to hear many of the same narratives coming from other partners. I think many of the challenges actually expressed from a regulatory perspective by our industry partners are equally frustrating for regulators. You know, we started off with what I think is very well understood to be an unfit regulatory framework, the In Vitro Diagnostic Directive, and the challenges that presented to us really came into full sight at a scale that we'd not seen before. Early on in the pandemic, and the UK had to introduce parallel regulation in order to try to ensure that we maintained the quality and the safety of the products available on the market. And this was somewhat of a painful experience, I think, for some of our commercial partners. But we're now getting to the point where we're getting our products through this process, and the uncertainties are made. But I think there's a lot of lessons here for how to, if you like, establish better regulatory frameworks. I think there's a lot of value in looking to international harmonization and standardization. Tools like MDSAP, the single audit framework, and MDSRP, the single review framework process, could be really essential for future pandemic preparedness. And certainly in the UK, we're looking at domestic assurance processes whereby we can take regulatory approvals from international partners and fast track those through to UK approvals in the future. So that's part of our current regulatory consultation. So I think there's a lot that can be done here, and I think certainly in our discussions with other global regulators, I think they share some of those sorts of similar concerns and similar aspirations. So there's a lot more that we can do in that space. But actually part of the challenge that we've all had across all sectors is this general lack of regulatory capacity in IVDs more generally. Within the MHRA, our regulatory capacity for IVDs was fairly modest. And I think, again, talking to colleagues in the FDA, the requirement for robust regulatory oversight has been a huge step up from our business as usual processes. And looking out to industry partners, they experience the same challenges, and our healthcare sector partners experience the same challenges. So I think there's a lot we could do to step up our regulatory capacity more generally to be prepared for future pandemics, but also to be prepared for the big changes that we've got forthcoming with IVDR and the future UK regs. Another area that I think we really need to improve upon next time is around the basic scientific studies that we need to conduct to really understand that association between the biomarkers or the measurands of interest and the disease dynamics and the populations of interest and the clinical indications that we're trying to study, and to understand better at an earlier stage how different testing modalities and analyte classes change over time, and the different information that provides, and finding the right measurands for the right clinical indications and using that earlier to develop effective diagnostic testing strategies. I think much of this information around the disease dynamics and how analytes are associated with that over time are only really just coming into clarity now, and we need to have this information much earlier so that we can design and develop effective diagnostic testing strategies with the right kit, the right tool for the right job at the right time, much earlier on in our future pandemic preparedness. And part of that can also then lead into target product profiles. I think one of the successes within the UK that is being recognised is our early response in developing target product profiles. Building off the work of WHO and FIND and others, and they've been really valuable, we think, to our industry partners, and they've helped to give them a clear steer on what the expectations are, what the type of studies they need to develop in order to meet those evidence requirements, and they've supported conversations with both regulators but also adoption partners and healthcare providers. The other challenge that we've noticed that has come up is really being able to articulate and define what the clinical reference standard needs to be in the performance evaluations of tests. And in particular, this the challenge that we've got now in the UK of differentiating between people who are infected and people who are infectious. And you'll frequently hear people referring to, if you have a CT of less than 20 or less than 25, then you're infectious, and if it's above that, then you're not infectious. And really, we have no clinical reference standard for infectiousness at the moment. And I think this is a challenge that we need to address for future pandemics, because as it has emerged over the course of time, understanding whether somebody is infectious in addition to being infected is really important for keeping society going and reducing these chains of transmission. So we need some work on really trying to define what are the key clinical reference standards, infected, infectious, immune, and how do we define these, and how do we then establish the right methodologies and the right tests to demonstrate those performances. Similarly, early development of reference materials and methods is essential, and maybe having, if you like, imperfect reference materials earlier in the pandemic would allow us greater quality control and standardization of assays. But again, our organization internally within the MHRA NIBS has played quite a key role in this in terms of developing these materials. And I think, again, we need to have a greater drive to get these materials out earlier and to standardize our methods, faster. And to do that, we need this supporting infrastructure for sample collection, sample distribution, and platform trials. Samples are essential in being able to validate and evaluate assays. But actually, for many of the technologies, particularly point of care tests and self-tests, you can't just use surplus samples. You can't use samples from biobanks. You have to run prospective trials in context in the populations in which they're intended to be used. And that needs to be done at scale. And to get efficiency, these should be large, well-designed, rolling platform trials that many companies can benefit from, and ideally would be collaboratively delivered at a global scale. Within the agency, we've really seen our exceptional use authorization powers come into play as part of a pandemic. They were very rarely used before, but we can see a greater role for how these powers can support innovation of public benefit in the future, both within a pandemic context, but also outside of a pandemic context, to help get promising technologies to market in a more risk proportionate and controlled manner. And that leads me on to this point about having robust post-market surveillance and post-market performance follow-up plans can help mitigate some of these risks around imperfect pre-market evidence. So at the start of the pandemic, our evidence base was imperfect. We had to make regulatory decisions based on contrived small-scale samples, but actually being able to control and to enforce and to have robust plans as to how that evidence base was going to be improved over time enabled the MHRA to make risk proportionate decisions around our EUAs. And I think that this could provide a model for other regulatory partners, whether they be notified bodies or approved bodies, to take similar approaches in the future where perhaps robust pre-market evidence is not pragmatic or feasible to collect. We've suffered a bit of a comms problem with misinformation in the UK, and I spend much of my time responding to freedom of information requests from concerned citizens. And we've tried our hardest to really improve the transparency of what we do, making our evidence and decision-making processes public. I think we need to do more in future pandemics. I think we need to have patients and the public in the room with us, making decisions, helping to inform our policies and strategies. And I think that's a lesson that everybody could probably benefit from looking at. What role can we do to improve trust and accountability and to counter misinformation? And finally, and part of the reason why I'm really excited to be here is around this, global collaboration on IVDs is really needed to protect our citizens. Whilst Britain is an island, it's not an island when it comes to protecting its citizens from infectious disease. And I think, certainly at the start of the pandemic, we saw some rather upsetting trends with regards to global collaboration, and it's improved greatly in the past year or so. But I think we can do a lot more. And certainly with some of the points that I've referred to earlier, I'll be really keen to look at how the UK can work with international partners to really try to improve our global pandemic responsiveness in the future. That's me. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mike. Lots more food for thought there. So with that, I will move on to our next speaker. So Anafi Mataka is project lead at the African Society for Laboratory Medicine. He's a diagnostics expert with 17 years of experience, which has ranged from the front line of health service delivery as a laboratory scientist to managing national, regional and international laboratories, strengthening programs in limited resource settings. At ASLM, Anafi provides leadership to several projects that include building laboratory and epidemiology workforce capacity for antimicrobial resistance in Africa and Asia, the accelerated adoption and implementation of SARS-CoV-2 antigen rapid diagnostic testing, and community testing for COVID-19. So over to you, Anafi.
Thank you, Nelly. I'm here to present to you, following up an exciting lineup of presenters that speak to exactly what the African Society for Laboratory Medicine stands for. For those that are not aware of the ASLM, we are a Pan-African organization that galvanizes stakeholders to really advance diagnostics in Africa. So I'm going to give you the perspective of ASLM with regards to advocating for innovative solutions as the theme of the presentation of this roundtable is. But let me start by acknowledging, I think, the same messages that have been coming out throughout the previous presentations. Here across the continent, you realize that the regulatory and registration approvals of diagnostics is really plagued by a lengthy and often complex registration process that sometimes takes years. And this certainly compromises the quality assured in vitro diagnostics that are actually out there. And this usually comes as a result. I think my colleague from the SG in Singapore also mentioned this. Manufacturers and the rest of the stakeholders are actually frustrated by the variable documentation requirements across countries. There's also lack of information, including also lack of human resources in most country regulatory bodies. Sometimes the costs are actually prohibitive, and this often leads to a long lead time. But we all agree in this forum that early availability to diagnostics is often key. But the truth of the matter is this is often not guaranteed. It's not guaranteed in such that for us to actually have these diagnostic products do what they are supposed to do, to really ultimately give us that universal health coverage, we have that continuum of stages that happen from needs assessments until the diagnostic product is available. But really normally, even though, as somebody else mentioned earlier on, though there is a recommendation that maybe we could actually take IVDs that are already PQ'd or even have approvals from major regulatory bodies, this is not always the case. You find that most of the time, countries still need to go ahead and do their own in-country validations. And in most times, these really take long. Sometimes, for example, for EID, people need sufficient number of samples, positive samples from infants to actually reach the required sample sizes. That takes quite long. And you find that that is followed by another process where you have the review of in-country committees that could take another 2 to 3 months. And then maybe they have all the required information and the data. And for committees to sit and actually get that approval, it's another maybe 3 to 6 months. Now the technology is registered, but then the programs also may actually provide another layer. And as you know, we are all usually busy in programs. It takes another 2 to 3 months. And then we decide to procure, competitive bidding goes on, you know what happens. And then the tender is awarded, another 2 to 3 months. And the usual suspects in terms of problems of availability of products. The supply chain is not always smooth. That takes another 3 months. So you realize that whilst the product has already been made available in terms of theoretically being approved, but most of these stages really take time. And this information, courtesy of FIND, you realize that most of the time we delay introduction. Up to 40% of the time is taken through validation. And this slide just shows some of the examples, just picking some of the two, and maybe one of the typical cases, that of TB lump, where nearly as many countries as possible have tried to do the evaluation that is green there, but you realize that maybe the other stages, they haven't really moved that much. So that poor recognition and reliance on existing evaluations in similar settings has not really done as much good in giving us the ability to move faster. And I think the PIMA CD4 could also be a classic example of a diagnostic which has been maybe in quotes over-evaluated in our settings. We also know that the impact of early availability of diagnostics is very crucial. And this is a typical case study from the Ebola epidemic in Africa, where this model shows that up to 30% to 70% of the cases actually can be detected earlier, with the potential to achieve a lot of savings. In the classic case of COVID-19, where we could actually call this an epidemic of tests. We all know what happened. This is just a timeline of what happened in Africa in terms of tests. You know, early February, the manual PCR came through, the automatic ones, antibody testing picked up in around May, and then by August, antigen tests were already available. That was quite relatively fast indeed, and there's been that swift availability of performance data of COVID-19 tests. Particularly, I could find which produced a lot of useful data for regulatory approvals and uptake for COVID-19 in the continent. So that was a classic case of tests really being approved and moving as fast as possible. But you realize that this is not true for many other diseases. Usually countries lack access to relevant information to make many of these decisions. And therefore at ASLM, we decided, I think this is time to try and make a difference and make this information available. And we created what we coined the ASLM Diagnostic Evidence Hub. So what is this Diagnostic Evidence Hub? It is really a platform where we have tried to pull as much information as possible in terms of performance evaluations, also including some of the publicly available information, such as the WOPQ information. We have actually tried to bring this into a one-stop shop. Hopefully this can actually help national regulatory bodies, stakeholders, national leaders, and all those interested in adopting diagnostics at country level to be able to get this information all at once, compare the performance of the studies, including all the key elements that are crucial in actually making decisions, such as even error rates and everything like that, so that this becomes a one-stop shop that they can quickly refer to and maybe probably jump that stage of those in-country validations that may not add additional value. But we realize the hub is something very crucial. From our consultations over the course of the last half of the year, we realized that this is so crucial that we may probably need to think more and more of how the diagnostic hub can actually be more useful. We want to be shaping that interface to the challenges that countries face when introducing most of the new diagnostic products. Should we be including evidence and tools for implementation and scale up of these new diagnostics in addition to what we are already providing? How much of this is being actually used? So we want to make sure decision makers are actually, particularly those that are from the National Public Health Labs, are actually continuously updated of what is there. And we have tried to make this as accessible as possible, and including even downloadable table formats where teams can actually download and move on and be able to make decisions from that. So really moving on beyond HIV tests, we are of the standpoint that there are so many other diseases that are of priority that the countries need to look at. And can we link up this with the efforts that we are doing to define essential diagnostic lists? And that pushes me to really, what are the key elements of data that are actually limiting all these issues that we have been mentioning in terms of implementation of diagnostics? What are the priorities? I'm just trying to use these questions to tease out our thinking in line with the theme of this session, that many of these African settings have actually overlooked in terms of regulatory processes and uptake. And that to provide a bit of evidence that we find in the data, we realize that this is cases of ASLM and find work in Africa, where about 10 out of the 38 countries that we have surveyed really define priority testing for their testing across the nation. But although they do this, they do not do it based on performance, and there's so much little attention to disease burden that is coming through. And further digging down into the data, we realize that although these tests sometimes when they are approved for example, the TB testing. We looked at level 1 of level 1 up to level 1 being the basic level, up to the highest levels of testing for in the TB network. You realize, as you can see, hardly most of them go beyond 60%. So the tests are approved, but really, are they being available where they are needed? The same is across HIV tests. Of course, the RDT is slightly different, but the rest of them, they follow the same trend. The same also follows the same trend in terms of other tests that also affect the people who are affected by HIV and TB also have other elements as well, other diseases. Just speaking of maternal and child health, we also realize, I think, that most of the key tests actually not being fully utilized or being taken up by the countries. So moving forward, what should we be thinking of? We think when new tests are being implemented, are they really, we need to be asking ourselves, are they really improving clinical and public health? Are they most, it's not only that, but introducing a test is not supposed to be just introducing a test. Is it really more cost effective than the previous or existing standard? But we realize that we do not have this data collected at country level. And in conclusion, this is just to really elicit this discussion that as we continue to work with partners to shape the agenda in terms of really increasing access, and we need to think what are the issues that really affect the uptake of the diagnostics, including the approvals as well. We need to be thinking of the performance, the disease burden that we should justify which tests we should be really concentrating on. And most importantly, the impact. The impact is so crucial for us to be putting our energies there. So cost effectiveness of the adopted tests in the African settings will be our key goal moving forward. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Anafi. I think, again, some really interesting points there to complement some of the other speakers. I think it's really great to hear some reflections on some of the more downstream pieces around implementation. So beyond the regulatory approvals and seeing some of the layers there that are a challenge and sort of delaying rollout of new diagnostic technology. So I'm sure we'll come to that in our discussion. So on to our final two speakers before we get into a bigger discussion. The first is Susie Braniff, who is a scientist in the pre-qualification IVD assessment team, which is within the Division of Access to Medicines and Health Products at the World Health Organization. Her key responsibilities are coordinating the expert review panel for diagnostics, and she is the team focal point for the collaborative registration procedure and provides technical support for the assessment of IVDs. Over to you, Susie.
Thank you so much, Helen. So are my slides going to be displayed or should I pop them up?
Coming right up.
Thank you.
Being delayed, apologies.
Great, thanks so much. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with this group today. And my presentation is really an introduction to the collaborative registration procedure, and my colleague Agnes will expand on the regulatory aspect of this a little more. But I wanted to start with just reminding everyone what actually happens during the pre-qualification phase for IVDs. Next slide, please. So you're probably aware that WHO have been assessing and evaluating IVDs for a very long time, for more than 30 years. But since 2010, we've introduced a more standardized approach to the way that we do that. And you can see in the larger blue box here, the range of diseases that are currently within the scope of pre-qualification. Down the bottom in lighter blue with a little star are hemoglobin point of care tests and glucose meters and test strips. We're in the process of developing specifications for those products, and they'll become part of the pipeline very soon. And we're also working on TB nucleic acid tests at the moment. So the pipeline's constantly expanding, although I must admit with the pandemic running for the last 2 years, that has slowed our progress down a little in that department. But our aim in PQ is to promote and facilitate access to safe, appropriate and affordable IVDs that are of good quality. And our focus is on IVDs for priority diseases and their suitability for use in resource-limited settings. Next slide, please. So there's 3 main components to the assessment that we do in the pre-qualification team. There is a review of a product dossier that's provided by the manufacturer of the IVD. There is a performance evaluation component, and there's also an inspection of the manufacturing sites where that IVD is made. All of this information gathered during the assessment is used to conduct a labelling review to make sure that the labelling that goes out with the product, particularly the instructions for use, is accurate and appropriate and represents the performance of the product. Next slide, please. So I'll just quickly go through the kind of assessment that happens in each of these 3 different components. So product dossier, here we're having a look at the manufacturer's documents that they have provided to us. We have very detailed instructions for the manufacturer as to what we need to see for our assessment. And these documents will go to a subject matter expert who will analyse the relevance of the data that's been provided. They're looking for quality data that supports the manufacturer's claims of quality, safety and performance for that particular IVD. And they will also be checking to see that the studies performed are appropriate and that they are well designed to actually show how the product works in the field. There will be a review of the completeness, accuracy and consistency of the data that's provided over the IVD life cycle. So looking at the initial product design, the way the product has been validated for use, the way it's being manufactured and what quality control checks are in place, and how the release or the batch release of the product occurs onto market. Our reviewers are also checking to see that the PQ technical specifications are met. So for each particular analyte that's part of the pre-qualification scope, we publish quite a detailed set of technical specifications that our expert reviewer will check the manufacturer's dossier against. And we're also looking to see if the manufacturer has considered the use of the product in resource-limited settings. So how robust is that product performance under different environmental conditions with different users, and how stable is the product over time when the environment is changing? Next slide, please. So the manufacturing site inspection will be conducted at all sites that are relevant to that IVD that's being considered for pre-qualification. Our inspectors are looking for evidence of a fully implemented quality management system based on international standards. They will also be informed by our technical expert who's had a look at the dossier if there's any particular areas that they should be focusing on while they're on site. They will consider the robustness of the product for WHO intended settings and users. And during the inspection, the IVD that is applying for pre-qualification must be in routine manufacturing so that they can see the product being made. They will also be having a look at the site and keeping in mind, is there evidence that that site has sufficient capacity to ensure reliable delivery if they do become pre-qualified and suddenly receive very large orders for the product. Next slide, please. And so the third component of our assessment is the performance evaluation component. This is intended as a verification of the performance of the IVD that's been submitted. We are not trying to redo all of the extensive studies that we've asked the manufacturer to do. We are trying to verify the manufacturer's claims for that particular product in our hands. So these IVDs will be challenged with a focus on their use in resource-limited settings and in the context of any relevant WHO guidelines. For the evaluation, a standard PQ protocol will be followed because there's different laboratories that we work with for this, but they have the same protocol for that particular analyte. The data set that we obtain from this evaluation is intended to complement the verification and validation data submitted by the manufacturer in the product dossier, and also the findings that we get from the site inspection. So currently these performance evaluations take place at either a WHO collaborating centre or a WHO performance evaluation laboratory. Next slide. So the pre-qualification decision is based on a successful outcome in all three components of the assessment. The IVD must pass the dossier review stage, the site inspection, and the performance evaluation requirements. At this time, we do the final labelling review and prepare a very high-level public report, which is on our website, and anyone has access to it to get an overview of what happened during the assessment. At this stage, the product is listed. Again, that list is available on the website, and the product is now eligible for WHO and UN procurement. Next slide, please. So at this current point in time, we have 102 different IVDs listed. I've put the web address where you can look them up, and you can see they're for a number of different analytes. Most of them are for HIV and malaria products. Next slide, please. Now, the collaborative registration procedure. This is a pathway where we hope to promote reliance on what has happened during the pre-qualification assessment. So even though we produce this high-level public report for everyone, in fact, we also produce a number of very detailed reports of what happened during the assessment. And normally these are only shared with the manufacturer. So for the dossier review report, we have evidence of how we assessed all of the different components of the dossier and what our findings were. For the site inspection report, we'll have a list of the on-site inspection findings, including the evaluation and conclusions, the audit trail that was followed, and a list of non-conformities and observations and how they were resolved. For the performance evaluation report, an extensive study report is collected that has all of the characterisation data for the samples that are tested, the lot numbers of the IVD that were examined, the way the data was analysed, and a full set of results. So we have 3 very detailed reports produced for each IVD that has been pre-qualified. Next slide, please. So under the CRP, and Agnes is about to give you a lot more detail about how this works, the NRA who wants to use the CRP can sign an agreement, as well as the manufacturer of a product that has been pre-qualified, that it will allow confidential data sharing. So these 3 reports I've just told you about will become available to the NRA to see exactly what information was assessed and how we reached our decision to pre-qualify the product. Our hope is using this reliance mechanism, we can avoid duplication of effort. We are allowing the NRA experts to review the WHO findings, and they can ask us questions about the findings. And this can help accelerate the decision by that NRA on whether or not they are going to authorise that product. So the goal is a shorter pathway to national registration for quality assured IVDs and optimisation of resources for participating countries by using this reliance mechanism. So I'll stop there and I'll pass over to my colleague Agnes, who will give you more information about the regulatory piece. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Susie. And with that, we do have Agnes Sitakijo, who is also from the WHO, who'll give us the final presentation before we go into discussion. So Agnes is a technical officer at the Facilitated Product Introduction team within the WHO, which is part of the Regulation and Safety Unit under Regulation and Pre-Qualification Department. Agnes is a trained pharmacist and has a master's in pharmaceutical technology and has more than 20 years of experience in the regulation of medicines and medical devices, including in vitro diagnostics. So Agnes, I look forward to hearing your session now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. Experiencing some technical glitch on my end. I don't know whether you can see my presentation.
Yes, can see your slides.
So let me just see. For some reason, I've lost my presentation on the slide.
Would you like us to share screen, Agnes, instead?
You just give me one minute.
Sure.
I think I'm using multiple screens, and for some reason I cannot view full screen. Okay. So do you mind if I can present without the video, because now I can't even see the button for video?
Yes, of course.
Great. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, colleagues, and sorry for the technical glitch. My name is Agnes Sitakijo. As introduced, I'm a technical officer from the WHO headquarters under the Facilitated Product Introduction team. And we are responsible for the collaborative registration procedure, but myself, I'm responsible for collaborative registration procedure for IVDs. This is great. So I wanted to start my presentation by this particular slide, and I hope you can see my slide, that speaks about the WHO World Health Assembly Resolution, 3 important World Health resolution, which speaks about a need for all medical products that are to be sent to country needs to get approval by the National Regulatory Authority in line with the current international standards. And understanding that there is no clear vision or policy about how to set up regulatory systems in times when it is unrealistic to manage all functions in one national setting for most of the regulators due to many reasons, including globalization of regulatory science, and where you have products which are likely more complex and sophisticated, but also as we learned heavily during the COVID-19 pandemic. So how to transfer or translate the regulatory information to facilitate in-country approval. I was listening to the previous speakers in terms of the difficulties that they had experienced or they're still experiencing in introducing products into countries. So we are asking this question because WHO has come up with specific concepts and specific solutions that we are promoting in order to facilitate transfer of regulatory information to improve in-country approval. So main message really in this particular slide is on the need to facilitate availability of WHO pre-qualified medical product by accelerating or acceleration of national registrations to get the product reach the patients faster. And so WHO pre-qualification, as explained by my colleague Susie, provides a good basis to facilitate that. The model that WHO proposes involves regulatory cooperation, that is between national regulatory authorities or with trusted institutions such as WHO, and of course, promoting information sharing. Going to this particular slide that really takes us to the last slide that was presented by Susie in terms of the two important concepts which are called reliance and recognition. So NRAs may decide to take regulatory decisions based on their normal standard processes by making their own independent decisions based on its own reviews or inspection or performance evaluation, but certainly it's a lot more work for the National Regulatory Authority as shown on this particular picture of this pyramid, which is wider at the bottom where it reads normal standard processes. I hope you can see where my cursor is. So this is at the bottom of the pyramid where there is a lot more work for the NRAs once they decide to do their own independent decisions, but their own reviews in terms of technical files assessment, audit of the manufacturing sites, and performance evaluation. So using the normal or standard processes most of the time is cumbersome and difficult for regulators if they have to do all these functions by themselves. So the World Health Assembly Resolution 67.20, which is projected here also on this slide, has provided a lot of flexibilities and opportunities in terms of streamlining national regulatory decision-making processes by advancing various initiatives and opportunities to collaborate and use information from trusted institutions, including mature and advanced national regulatory authorities. So once the National Regulatory Authority starts using other mechanisms such as the collaborative registration procedure, which is based on reliance mechanism or joint activities through work sharing and joint reviews, which is at the middle of the pyramid, then the workload is significantly reduced as demonstrated both at the reliance, work sharing, joint review, and at the recognition. So this is just to demonstrate the increase in the level of effort and resources if you use normal processes or standard processes. And of course, on the other side, decrease in the level of effort and of course, risk once you start relying on other regulatory authorities' assessment outcome. On this particular slide, and as a continuation to my previous slides, regulators may decide to use either recognition if the outcome is directly applicable to the local context, and as long as sameness of the product and information on the technical file is verified. Or they may decide to use reliance if some of the outcome is not applicable to the local context. And I'm just going to give an example. For example, some of the aspects that may be assessed by the national regulatory authorities when using reliance or the collaborative registration procedure for that matter is the information on the label. There could be very specific national requirements to do with the label or information for use, depending on where this product is used and the level of expertise that might be available at the a point of care, and also issues around storage conditions, because some of these products are subjected to lengthy importation processes, but also climatic conditions may be different between different countries. So regulators who have decided to use both of the concepts, either reliance or recognition, may decide to conclude differently from the WHO PQ. So the sovereignty of the country or independence in terms of the decision is respected once you use either reliance or recognition concepts. So regulators may also benefit through the shared information for harmonization purposes. I think I heard my colleague from, is it from MHRA, who was speaking about how critical global harmonization and collaboration is, and especially at the time of the pandemic. And so reliance also and recognition promotes harmonization, because the information that is shared with countries by the manufacturer has to be the same as what has been shared with the WHO pre-qualification. And of course, most important, it accelerates national decision and improve access of the needed products. So some of the facilitated pathways that WHO have invented based on the two concepts that I've just mentioned is the collaborative registration procedure. And then there is another one called stringent regulatory authority collaborative procedure. And the last one is the regional network through joint activities or joint assessment. I'm not going to speak about the two last procedures because it is not yet implemented for the in vitro diagnostics, but I'm going to speak about the WHO collaborative registration procedure for diagnostics, which was piloted in 2019. So this is quite a new procedure as compared to the other medical products, which some of them started in 2004, such as the one for vaccine. So what are the key principles of the collaborative registration procedure? So collaborative registration procedure is based on three important key principles. So one is voluntary. Voluntary means that the participating entities, which is the manufacturer and the National Regulatory Authority, have to voluntarily agree to participate in the collaborative registration procedure. And this is why there is a specific form that need to be filled and signed by both parties to indicate their willingness to participate in the collaborative registration procedure. But another important element, which I've also touched base a little bit on my previous slide, is on the sameness of product, which brings along the issue of harmonization as well. So product and registration dossier in countries have to be the same as the pre-qualified product or what has been submitted to WHO. So you have to compare orange with orange or apple with apple. And so this is emphasized that the sameness is key. The other important key principle for the collaborative registration procedure is the confidentiality of the information. So we expect that throughout the collaborative registration procedure, confidentiality of the information is strictly adhered. And this is why assessment reports or assessment outcome from WHO is shared through a very restricted site, which is hosted by WHO, and only focal points from the appointed focal points from the National Regulatory Authority would have access to the this restricted site. But also another important element is that the harmonized product status is monitored both by WHO and the countries. So this is in a nutshell, and I'm not going to take a lot of time here, but this is in a nutshell what the collaborative registration procedure looks like. So the manufacturer and the National Regulatory Authority would have to sign agreement and consent form, which is shared to WHO. And then the manufacturer is expected to apply or to send a similar set of data to the National Regulatory Authority, but of course, take into consideration other national requirements that may not fall under the collaborative registration procedure. So once this is fulfilled, WHO will receive an information from the National Regulatory Authority that all the critical documents have been submitted, and that WHO can now share the information through the confidential site. And then WHO will share the reports of the, as mentioned by Susie, assessment report of the technical file, site audit report, and performance evaluation report. It is expected that the National Regulatory Authority would conduct abbreviated review, but first of all, to confirm sameness of the product, and then carry out assessment of the documents before issuing market authorization within 90 days after all the necessary documentation have been submitted to the NRI, including assessment outcome from the WHO. So once this is completed, the expected time for registration is 90 days. So we expect that the collaborative registration procedure really to attract national regulatory authorities to apply, or to attract even manufacturers to explore utilization of this very innovative procedure for registration of products within 90 days. So I'm just going to also briefly speak about these key steps of the procedure, but I'm not going to take too much time here. So 4 critical stages of the collaborative registration procedure. So one is the signing of the agreement by the national regulatory authorities, which is submitted to the WHO. And then the second stage is the signing of the consent form by the manufacturer, but also sharing of the confidential reports with the National Regulatory Authority upon fulfillment of the requirements by the manufacturer, and then the assessment of the documents and product approval within 90 days. After the product has been registered, there are 2 more important stages. So the third stage is the post-approval changes, which is managed by both WHO and the national regulatory authorities. So if the manufacturer has done or is considering to make any changes on the product, this has to be informed by all parties, and WHO will carry out assessment of these changes, and of course communicate with the national regulatory authority so that they can also take on board such changes. And then the registration maintenance, including the registration time, including the withdrawal or delisting or suspension of the products. So in 2019, WHO conducted a specific pilot for the collaborative registration procedure. And the objective were really to understand whether or assess the feasibility of the collaborative procedure for the in vitro diagnostics, understanding that this was a project, or this was a program that was run for other medical products. And so we needed to conduct some kind of a pilot for a specific country to understand whether the collaborative registration procedure would also be applicable for in vitro diagnostics. And so 5 countries participated in the procedures. And so our biggest lessons that we learned through the pilot was that collaborative registration procedure proved to be a great innovative mechanism that can accelerate registration of products, including IVDs. We experienced shorter regulatory approval times. IVDs were able to be registered within the timeline of 90 days, but there was a reduced workload for NRI's expert due to the reduced need for in-country evaluations based on the WHO PQ report. But we also experienced delays in some of the countries, and this also has been mentioned by some of the previous presenters on the issue of capacity of the national regulatory authorities to assess the technical files or to understand some of the parts of the technical files, but also in-country registration requirements, such as repetitive in-country performance evaluation, and of course, inadequate communication between key participants. In 2021, and maybe if I can go back to my previous slide. So when we were conducting the pilot, we used a draft guidelines because we wanted to understand what would be the peculiarities of the IVDs before finalizing or finalization of the CRP guidelines. And so in 2021, we published, WHO published a collaborative registration procedure guidelines to guide both participants, manufacturers, and NRIs on the specifics of the collaborative registration procedure. And so this, I've provided a link as well for the document so that you can, go through and understand what are the roles and responsibilities and what are the relevant documents that are required for participants on the collaborative registration procedure. So there is win-win outcome for all concerned stakeholders, and I'm not going to go through this because we will share the slides afterwards. But maybe my final message is that the collaborative registration procedure is critically important in helping to accelerate access to important medical products to the patients, and that not using the output and outcome from other regulatory authorities means lost opportunity, unnecessary duplication of efforts. We've had a lot of challenges that were experienced due to the COVID pandemic. And so that could have been avoided if we could opted to use reliance and recognition, and of course, increase the regulatory burden and waste of scarce resources, which can be used for other medical products that has not been assessed by WHO. So this is the end of my presentation, and I'm sorry for the technical glitch. I hand it over back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes, and I think that concludes our presentations today. So thank you, a massive thank you to all of our presenters. I think a huge amount of information, recommendations and experience has been shared in those discussions. We are a little bit behind time. So I'm going to hand over to Anton. I think if we've got a single burning question before we go into breakouts.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. First of all, I'd like to thank all the speakers. That was really wonderfully presented, very clear, and some themes and messages seem to be coming through very strongly there. We've got several questions which might be answered in the breakout. I think if you can all see the chat from Trevor to everyone about suggestions on practical and disruptive approaches to more rapidly and proactively lower the barriers. So that could really, we could try answering that during the breakout. Others has already replied to the question that was set to him by Robin, and then really the other questions are some. It may be just addressed to WHO, and it might set the theme really for what we're going to do in the breakout sessions. Is about this. We heard a lot about what's taken into account by WHO. And I saw that the medical device single audit process was taken into account, but I think it's this about two-way traffic really, and it seemed to me in some of the presentations, some of the problems were either things getting stuck at the national authorities, or some stuff being slow from WHO, and I saw the timelines and things that you tried to work to. But what happened if a manufacturing company with the NRAs got everything ready and organized, and the NRA approved it from their point? And why is that? Could there be a two-way process where that was just presented to WHO, who could look through it and say, hey, this is all in order, rather than it being a WHO sort of orientated process for the pre-qualification? And I just wondered whether the guys from WHO want to say something about that.
I might chime in here. So for pre-qualification, we do have our technical specifications document for a particular type of analyte. So to be pre-qualified, the manufacturer we're guaranteeing that the manufacturer meets those specifications. So we do have an abridged pathway where a manufacturer has already been through a stringent regulatory authority. They've got all their information together. Then they have the opportunity to speed things along. So there will be a very limited site inspection, only if it's necessary, if they have their MDSAP and it ticks all the boxes that we need. There will be either no dossier requirement or else a mini dossier if there's a few sections missing that we need to fulfill our specifications. And then there will be our performance evaluation. And that reduces the time significantly, because anyone who's been through pre-qualification before, we might have some people in the audience, knows that the dossier assessment is what takes the bulk of the time. So being able to significantly abridge that speeds things up. So we are, it is a bit of two-way traffic. To get on the list, we have to be able to verify that all of our specifications are met, but we are willing to consider other information.
Okay, thanks. Now, this isn't a discussion session. It's just, in a way, it's just asking questions, but we want to get to the, what you feel about all of this in the discussion part. I think we're just going to ask one quick last question. And Sergio, could you give examples in COVID's RDTs where transfer of regulatory information has been successful and has led to expeditious approval?
So let me see if I can respond to that. And I'm just going to give responses in two ways. So one is just based on the experience that I had with the African regulators through the African Medical Devices Forum. So during the pandemic time, we established the AMDF COVID-19 task force. And I'm glad that my friend Mataka was also part of the AMDF task force. And through this particular task force, we were able to use recognition concept. Okay, so we used recognition in a sense that we relied on the information or the authorizations or approval from both the WHO EUL, but also products that have been approved by stringent or trusted national regulatory authorities such as the US FDA. And so this really facilitated in terms of informing African regulators which are the products that have been approved by these institutions for them to quickly authorize or list for use, understanding that at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of confusion in terms of which assay to use or from which country has it been approved. A lot of donations were going to some of these countries. And so the use of the recognition concept really assisted regulators to adopt quickly or to inform them in terms of what products can be imported, even if they're not registered, but at least informing them what can be imported in their country based on the decision made either by WHO or mature or trusted national regulatory authorities. It's unfortunate that somewhere in the middle of the pandemic, WHO also invented another procedure, which is called WHO EUL facilitated procedure for COVID assay. So this was very specific CRP prototype to assist regulators in terms of have accessibility to the assessment reports by the WHO based on the EUL outcome. It's unfortunate that it has not been utilized so far. We conducted a series of workshops in all the regions to inform stakeholders that we do have this particular pathway that regulators can use to expedite at least listing based on the evidences from WHO. But it's unfortunate that this has not been explored so far, unfortunately. Over.
Thanks, Agnes. I think it's a really important point and clearly exciting that there's those kind of pieces, you know, evolving rapidly under the WHO's leadership. So thank you. So it is my job to close this out. I think we probably could have gone on for at least another hour, and I'm sorry that we're not in person because I think it would have been a very, you know, continued fruitful discussion. But please, I do ask that obviously the conversation doesn't happen here. I think there's a lot more that we can probably pull through on this topic, and I see some appetite amongst attendees that to sort of dig deeper to bring something productive out of the discussions, and that is the intent of the ILF, to be able to move the needle on critical topics like this. So just a couple of housekeeping pieces to end. The presentations that you saw will be shared and they have been recorded, so they will be made available by the IAS team in the coming weeks. We will share some minutes from the round table, and I think we will also regroup, myself, Anton, and the IAS team, to think about how do we keep progressing this and take it in the right direction and flesh it out to cover all of the bits that we didn't manage to get to during the discussion today. And then finally, at the end of this, there will be a short survey posted by the IAS just to get your feedback on how you felt the event went and any suggestions for improvement for future discussions. Obviously, as and when you get minutes, please do feel free to input to those. This is richer by the input from all the people participating in this discussion. So we really value your thoughts and ideas to drive this forward. And, you know, we'll be in touch on the next steps and follow up. So apart from that, a massive thank you from me. And then Anton, anything from you?
No, thanks for everybody to everybody for attending this and the input. The speakers were great, and it's you know, it was a fantastic roundtable for me. Thank you all.
Thank you, and thanks Nelly and the IS team for setting up all the infrastructure for us. It's been hugely helpful.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Hi, Robin.
Thank you.